All right, in a moment here, hopefully we will be joined by Eric Berger, the author of Reentry, our topic for this evening. And I sure hope that a lot of you have enjoyed this fantastic book. I definitely did. Hey, Eric,
Good evening.
good to see you again. As I have been telling people, maybe you heard, just getting started. I'm going to give it another few seconds here. Actually, we're at T-minus 8 seconds and counting on my watch before we hit 6 o'clock and actually get underway live here. And for anybody who may be wondering, I'm Matt Kaplan. I'm the Senior Communications Advisor to the Planetary Society. Formerly the creator and host for 20 years of Planetary Radio, still going very strong under my wonderful colleague Sarah, who is celebrating her 100th show this week. And it's a retrospective looking back over her first almost 2 years of shows. She's still got a ways to go before she catches up with me, but she's 10% of the way there now, almost. I welcome all of you as members. You are, of course, the people who make all this possible. If you are watching this after the live stream, after our live conversation with Eric, perhaps on our website, perhaps on the Planetary Society YouTube channel, well, we hope you're already a member. If you're not, we certainly hope that you will go to planetary.org/join and join, become one of us, this merry band of space geeks and fanatics, and have a good time with us advocating for space exploration and space development around the world. After all, it is our vision to know the cosmos and our place within it. And we all want that, don't we? So we'll continue now by my telling you a little bit about the fellow that you see in the other frame here in the member community. And Eric, bear with me as I give a little bit of a bio here. He is, of course, the senior space editor at Ars Technica. I'm also inclined to agree with Fraser Cain of Universe Today that he is very likely the best dedicated reporter about all things space who is currently active today. I can't think of anybody who does a better job. In 2021, Eric published Liftoff, Elon Musk and the Desperate Early Days That Launched SpaceX. We're here to talk about the magnificent sequel to that book. Of course, that's this one, Reentry, fully titled Reentry, SpaceX, Elon Musk, and the Reusable Rockets That Launched a Second Space Age. Eric is also a meteorologist who leads Space City Weather, where he and his colleagues write about the weather in Houston, Texas. But the new website, just like a year old, roughly, something like that,
Yeah.
is called The Eye Wall, Seeing You Through the Storm. It covers tropical activity down in that part of the world, the Atlantic Ocean, the Caribbean Sea, and the Gulf of Mexico. Check out it's a very revealing and very cool piece that is sort of a review or recap of the 2024 hurricane season, which just ended. And you can Google it and just Google the eye wall, and I'm sure it will pop up. Great fun, Eric. I guess you can't take the weatherman out of the space guy.
No, you can't, but thankfully hurricane season is over now, so we can take a little break from that for hopefully another 6 months.
Yeah, phew. A little bit of a relief, I hope, for a lot of people. Congratulations on this really amazing chronicle of SpaceX, the second one.
Well, thank you very much. It's been it's been a real privilege to be in a position to tell the story of SpaceX, which I think is really the most important story in spaceflight in the 21st century, at least alongside the rise of China as a major space power. Kind of the two big trends, I think, in the global space landscape have been, as I say, the rise of China and then the commercial space industry led by SpaceX. And so to be able to talk to all the critical people who were involved in that wild ride was really a privilege.
I'll go even beyond that, or at least I'll go beyond it in the form of a question. Can you think of another company that has changed an international industry or even a type of human capability to the degree that SpaceX has? I mean, and I'm talking about beyond just space technology now.
I think like you would find parallels with the Ford Motor Company in the automotive industry. Boeing, perhaps back in the early days of aviation, really taking kind of building upon, SpaceX did not invent the rocket. They did not invent the rocket engine. They didn't invent the concept of vertical landing. They just took it all and made it better, or sort of saw it through, and have really taken it to mass manufacturing, much as Ford did with the automobile and some of the early companies did with aviation. So I think that's really the parallels, is a company that built upon kind of the early years in technology and industry and just took it to a whole nother level.
Undoubtedly. And, your admiration for the stunning accomplishments by the thousands of men and women who work for SpaceX, it really comes through on almost every page. But as you say at the top of the book, it's also, I'm going to get it right here, the story of Elon Musk and his outsized spaceflight ambitions. I mean, was it difficult to strike that balance? Because really, I think you got it just right. And there were, I told you a little while ago, some of our members who, when they saw that we had selected this book as our our November selection in the book club, they thought, oh no, another worshipful book about Elon Musk. And I said, no, it is not. Read it and you'll see. How did you strike that balance?
Well, it was difficult because I really got into writing the book at about the time he was purchasing Twitter, and it was difficult to process on one hand the fact that he had built this magnificent space company, and you really cannot separate SpaceX from Elon. I mean, some people say, well, he just, he hired some people and they did it all, and he's just claiming credit for it, and that's not true. The big ideas and the initial funding and the relentless push forward all comes from Elon. And you can't really separate SpaceX from him and the success of SpaceX from him. I mean, just that there's no other company that's replicated it, and so I think he deserves a lot of the credit for that. But at the same time, you saw what he was doing with Twitter and his public statements that made a lot of people uncomfortable, and certainly his political involvement recently that came out after the book. But yeah, I did struggle with it, Matt, absolutely. And some of the things he was saying and doing were troubling to me. And I actually took several months off from writing and researching the book to kind of find my thoughts. And I came back with two plans. First of all, the first was to really focus on the engineers and the technicians who did the work that made it happen. And secondly, write an epilogue kind of about what I thought about all of it, and where I thought SpaceX was going, kind of with this new, even more public figure, politically active Elon Musk.
How did you find the contrast between those early struggling days and what you chronicle in this book? And I will say, the one and only time that I interviewed Elon was about 10 years ago, and they were struggling to get Falcon 9 off the ground. But he was totally dedicated to what he was doing. I mean, you could tell that. But he didn't seem to be having much fun. In fact, I even asked him about that. It was my last question. Are you having fun? I mean, you're building big rockets. You want to go to Mars. Is this fun? Totally seemed to throw him, totally seemed to confuse him. Now it may be that he's having too much fun.
I don't know. That's an interesting question to ask him. It's funny that in some ways the Falcon 9 years were more mature, absolutely, than the Falcon 1 years. But what remained constant from 2002 when the company was founded through even the early crew flights of Dragon was that the company was hungry and scrappy. And
scrappy, there's that word.
Yeah, well, it's a good word for SpaceX back in the day. But they just never had a great amount of resources or enough resources to do everything that Elon wanted the company to do. And so they were always moving fast because they were trying to get to the next milestone payment or unlock more contracts or this or that or the other thing. and they just, people just kept working 60, 80, 100-hour weeks to accomplish these goals. That's really only changed within the last 2 to 4 years with Starship. You look at what they're doing in South Texas, and I mean, from an engineering standpoint, what they're building with Starship is just awesomely impressive. Like, it's hard to comprehend what they have achieved in several short years, building up all of that from nothing. And that's only happened because they've had lots of resources, and they poured lots of resources, billions of dollars, into this launch facility and effort with the Starship program. And so that's really been interesting to see, because it's like after 20 years, the cash spigot has opened, and they're even going so much faster and further, and basically have the capability now to launch this Titanic rocket once a month.
Have you also noticed, as I believe I have, a change in the culture of SpaceX? When I did that interview 10 years or so ago, I had just been to Northrop Grumman 2 weeks before, and I interviewed a VP there, and the different corporate layers you had to get through protecting this guy were just kind of what you'd expect from an old line aerospace company. And then I went to SpaceX, and it was loose. It was more like going to a Silicon Valley company, and Elon came out of his cubicle, and we sat down in a conference room, and it was all really casual. And then another guy showed me around the factory floor. Then the last time I was in Hawthorne at the factory, we couldn't talk. We weren't allowed to record or interview anybody. I mean, you could sit in a Crew Dragon simulator or mock-up, but you couldn't talk to any employees. And it really, that was disappointing for someone in our business.
Yeah, I think it really got, things got much more buttoned down in terms of access to people, even back to like 2010, 2012. They just really was much more controlled access. And so that's just the way it is. Like, generally the employees don't talk to the press or to the public or about what they're doing. And that's a little bit disappointing, but they're trying to control the message. And that was really the pleasure of writing these books, is especially Reentry is told mostly through the eyes of people who worked there from 2010 to 2020, and no longer work there, so they're much freer to tell their stories about what actually happened. And so that's why I was able to get kind of such rich details and hopefully a strong narrative.
A very strong narrative, I assure you. Let me throw, I got several quotes I want to throw at you. Then this is another one from right up front. Musk's genius is that he not only saw this future, but believed in it enough to keep pushing, to keep fighting, and to will it into existence. Okay, so we know he was the driver, pushing everybody sometimes beyond their limits. Do you know how much he actually contributed to the innovations that at least partly enabled the company to make this achievement, in addition to that drive? I mean, he was for a long time, right, Chief Technology Officer?
Chief Engineer is the title he
Chief
likes
Engineer,
to use.
Sorry.
Okay. So by and large, the big decisions were made by him. In the book, I recount a meeting around 2011 where they were trying to decide how to get the first stage back to the atmosphere. And they had looked around and saw Maston had done in-air relight of an engine, and there had been some vertical landing tests. And after sort of trying a parachute on the first couple of flights of the Falcon 9, they were like, Elon sort of made the decision that we're going to try a vertical landing. And so they did that. And then really, with the Falcon 9 full thrust, you can see his imprint on the big decision to go for densified propellant, right? This is the super chilled liquid oxygen and kerosene that led to the load and go procedures, where you put the astronauts on the vehicle and load fuel after the crew is on board. And that was something that NASA was really, really against. And he pushed and pushed. And again, that was his decision. And a lot of the design decisions in Starship, of course, stainless steel is the most famous. But again, he was the guy who made the call to do the booster catch that they just demonstrated 6 or 8 weeks ago. So I mean, look, SpaceX has thousands and thousands of engineers who are working very hard every day to solve very, very challenging problems, and not all of them reach the level of Elon. But what he says in meetings is, you know, if you have a problem you can't solve, either because of money or technical know-how, or you need more of the resources, tell me. Like, don't not tell me, right? And I find out about later. Tell me so I can help you solve that problem. And then, like, the big decisions, you probably were in that conference room on the first floor of Hawthorne
Yes.
with the Falcon
Yeah.
1 picture on the wall.
Yeah.
That's like the executive conference room. That's where they meet still when they're not in Starbase. And like, he makes the big decisions. So, you know, it's it's kind of a different Elon that you see inside the company, I think, than the public character of him in some sense.
First of all, thank you for including Masten Space Systems and mentioning them just now, because we have a special place in our heart for that now defunct company, because they were the first to take Planet Vac from Honeybee Robotics, which we at the Planetary Society, our members helped enable the development of, and stuck it on the leg of one of their little hoppers.
Nice.
And it was very interesting to see how that apparently played a role in inspiring Elon and saying, this little company did it with this thing that didn't go up very high. I guess we can make this science fiction concept work.
Yeah, I think, you know, one of the things, you know, that quote you read about pushing and pushing earlier, you know, in the book, I kind of go through how, you know, NASA had tried reusability with the space shuttle. The military started the DCX project.
Oh man, I miss it.
And then they sort of gave up on it. NASA picked it up for a few more years and then gave up on it. NASA had another reusable plan, you know, and they had all these ideas, and like, they never saw them to fruition, right? Even the space shuttle, which was tremendous, right, technological achievement, was not rapidly reusable or low cost. And so it took someone to come along and say, no, we're going to, you know, bang away at this until it works. And it took them 13 years from the company was founded to land their first rocket, but they did it. And again, that was because it was in the DNA of the company that you had to get to low cost launch.
The Delta Clipper, the DCX, man. I knew people who worked on that project, and we could have been years ahead of
Yes.
where we were if they'd continued that project. Look it up, folks. I'm afraid Amber's not here to throw all kinds of great links up in the chat. So, but anybody who wants to throw up a link, as long as it's relevant, please feel free to share that with the other members. I got a couple more quotes. One leads into the other. And this first one, kind of similar to what I just read. Quotes from the book, of course. Musk, the ringmaster, guided the company along this razor-thin line, and his methods were at times ruthless. Always he urged his managers to spend less, and he pressured them to work harder and faster, but it was never fast enough. It's a theme that runs through the entire book, and there is this great quote that you got from one of those guys who was worked almost to death and then left the company after doing great work. Tom, is it Mueller or Mueller?
Mueller. Yeah.
Mueller. Tom Mueller. He said, "We were out there beating history, but Elon was still pissed at us. Like everything else we've ever done, it was way slower than Elon wanted and way faster than anyone had ever done it before. It was pretty much the story of our lives."
Yeah, I love that quote from Tom. That's great.
It's amazing. It's wonderful. And this is, you tell this story over and over and over. People, you know, sleeping under their desks. I mean, who was the woman, Catriona, I think Chambers, who would just be overcome with exhaustion sometimes and sleep in a rocket?
Sleep in the inner stage of the very first Falcon 1 at Space Launch Complex 40. Yeah.
I think this is another one. This is quoting you from the book. The right mindset for an engineer is to approach each problem as a puzzle, finding joy in the discovery of a solution. God bless them. For some of us non-engineers, a life of unending problems sounds pretty terrifying. Rocket science is not for us. Amen, brother.
Isn't that the truth? Like, can you imagine going to work every day and having some intractable problem you had to build some piece of hardware or software to fix? That sounds like a
And
nightmare
it
to
keeps
me.
blowing up, or
Yeah.
just, yeah, right.
Go figure out what went wrong with this. You have, 1/100th of a second of telemetry data.
Yeah. That word scrappy, it came up earlier, and you use it particularly early in the book. Do you think would you still describe it as a scrappy company?
No, I would say they're not scrappy. They don't have to be. They have much more resources, and funding. I think what is remarkable about SpaceX today still is that they are still an insurgent. They're not. They are obviously, they're going to put 95% of the mass into orbit this year. If you add up all of it from every country and company around the world,
Incredible.
and they operate half of the operational satellites in space or more, and so they are like the world's dominant space flight. Oh, and by the way, the only private company in the world that can put humans into orbit. It's like they're the dominant spaceflight company in the world, but they are not like they don't feel like the incumbent. They're still trying to, like, I think the most compelling example to me is they have the Falcon 9 rocket, which is now launched 400 times. It's still the only world's reusable rocket. They could sell it like at a third or a quarter of their competitors' costs and still probably make money. And they're working as hard as they can with Starship to put the Falcon 9 out of business. Gwen Shotwell was at a conference a week or two ago where she was bragging about how, well, we're going to retire the Falcon 9 rocket in like 6 years. And I'm thinking, this is the rocket that changed the global launch industry. And like everyone's building things to catch up to the Falcon 9.
I heard you say that to Fraser Cain in your conversation with him. I was just blown away. I made a note of it. I mean, my God, they could just sell the rocket to one of those competitors, ULA or somebody. They could put Vulcan aside and take over the Falcon 9. Here's an observation that you make, which maybe has taken on new significance in the last couple of months, but it's leading into someplace else I'd like to go with this conversation. MUSK typically views regulations as unnecessary impediments, and at the very least, he told his directors to question all rules and requirements. Yikes! You feel like a prophet?
Oh no, I don't feel like a prophet. That's been the story with him for quite a while, and we've seen it play out over the years. And so now, the kind of the scary thing now is that he's in a position to help write the regulations, right? I mean, the people that he's recommending to work at the FAA, FCC, other places like that, like, will have a direct hand in regulating his businesses, and that's pretty clearly a conflict of interest. And so it's something as journalists we're going to have to watch pretty closely to see how that all plays out.
What I was hoping to lead into from that is, where did all those regulations come from? The FAA, many of them NASA, some of them just, practices that had worked for the agency for years, even if they were a little bureaucratic. You tell the story in the book of all the NASA people who kind of went to bat for SpaceX and as much as possible cleared a lot of that stuff away. I mean, you give several examples of how they helped to do this. And I hope, if you want to talk about any of those, great. But I'm also thinking of right up at the top, Deputy Administrator Lori Garver, who, without her advocacy, I suspect we would never have seen SpaceX achieve what it has.
Yeah, it's true. There were lots of people at NASA, at the FAA, in the Department of Defense who gave SpaceX a nudge along the way to help it along, either with the regulatory process or to get a launch site in Florida, or to get launch contracts from the government, that really were in the right place at the right time to help the company. And when you talk about the regulations that at the FAA, a lot of these were written, were not written with a company like SpaceX in mind, which seeks to be disruptive and fly frequently, right?
Yeah.
No one was writing these regulations for airline-like operations for a rocket company. rocket launches were special and rare when these were written. And so a lot of the regulations are antiquated or are definitely an impediment. And it's not just SpaceX saying this. If you talk to the CEOs of other rocket companies, as I have, who deal with them, they will say there are lots of these rules that do seem arbitrary and capricious and somewhat designed to slow things down. So on one hand, do I think Musk has too little respect for regulations and the intent to protect people on the ground and other things? Yes, I do. On the other hand, are the regulations overly burdensome and slowing down a company, an innovative company like SpaceX? Absolutely. It's not like a black and white story, right? It's
Yeah.
the truth is somewhere in between. It is my hope that we will get some leaner regulations out of this the Trump administration, and I know some of the people working on that, and they have have some faith that they're going to do the right thing. But we'll see what happens.
I heard a story about that even some Democrats in Congress are looking to see some streamlining in certain areas. So that's a fascinating development. What about some of those other NASA heroes? I mean, you describe, of course, tons of them within SpaceX. I'm thinking of people like Holly Ridings, who was one of those who tried to clear the way to some degree.
Yeah. She was wonderful to talk to, and so she was the flight director on the first SpaceX cargo mission to go to the International Space Station in 2012, and she had a difficult decision to make because the spacecraft got up there, and within meters of the space station, then it started to its range detection sensors, the lidar started to fail, and she sort of went against the flight rules and went against some of the recommendations of people on her team to allow SpaceX to basically modify the software to turn down this dazzling issue. What has happened is the lidar was signals were bouncing off the Kibo module on the space station, and SpaceX wanted to narrow sort of the aperture that the lidar were looking at, and they did that, and ultimately they docked successfully. But she made a pretty brave call, and so I talked to her extensively about that. And again, if they had called that mission off, it would have been a pretty big hit and set SpaceX back significantly.
Turning back to SpaceX, I mean, who are some of the people that you documented, who you got to talk to largely, within the company, who were real standouts to you? I mean, at least, mention a couple of them, people who made this happen and have since left.
I mean, you can go right back to the beginnings. The most important people were Tom Mueller, the chief of propulsion. Kevin Miller worked for him, and he was sort of the deputy chief of propulsion and did some amazing development work with Falcon with the Merlin engines. Tim Buzza was the launch director, was really kind of a glue guy in the sense that a lot of people at the company rallied around him. Hans Koenigsmann had a more public role, was at the company for a long time, left a few years ago. Gwen Shotwell, I think everyone knows her, but she's been by Elon's side now for 22 years at SpaceX, and really is a pivotal figure. There's a guy named Mark Trinkosa, who's kind of the chief engineering force at SpaceX these days, kind of right below Elon in the sense that everyone reports up to him, and he's really driving forward the development of Starship. Not a public name really, but just an incredibly important person who has Elon's trust. And lots of people. There's lots of fun characters in the book. There's a guy named Ben Kelly who had a wild ride at Vandenberg and then was the first engineer to really work on the first drone ship. A guy named Roger Carlson who led the first Dragon recovery effort back in December of 2010, and just kind of they had a really wild trip trying to get that first Dragon safely back to Earth. And so it was really fun to tell his story. There's just lots of great people.
I'd love for you to say more about Gwen Shotwell, because she may be well known to us space geeks, but I'll bet that she's not known to 5% of the people who recognize Elon around the world. And, the relationship there, what she has brought to the company as an engineer, but also as somebody that's made all the parts work smoothly.
The way I like to describe her is kind of a velvet glove over a fist of steel, because she's wonderful personality, great to talk to, friendly, smiling, but like will kind of cut the throats of competitors, so to speak. She's just, and she's like, people think, well, Elon's the really outspoken one and Gwen's the serious one, but no, man, she's in it too to disrupt the industry and sort of, works hand in hand with Elon to kind of carry forward that vision of completely upending the launch industry. She'd worked at the Aerospace Corporation for almost a decade before coming to SpaceX, and so she saw a lot of how the space industry worked and understood why it was moving slow. And just one of the things she really wanted to do was work with SpaceX to change that. And so that's why she actually went to the company. But she's great. I mean, she does everything from lead sales to leading all of the corporate side of things, communications, staffing, HR, legal. She basically runs the business, while the engineer, and she's an engineer, but then the engineers kind of do the engineering work.
Do you worry if she were to leave the company? And I think you say in the book that she might be nearing the point when she's had enough.
Yeah, I mean, well, I wouldn't say she's had enough. Like she loves her job, but she recently turned 60, and I think there's some other things she'd like to try in her life, potentially even politics. I don't know, but she's an essential part of the company, and I think she gives customers at NASA, Department of Defense, and elsewhere, while Elon is out doing turbulent and very political things, which some people love and are turn off a lot of other people. She kind of gives everyone confidence that there's a steady hand at the ship, and so she were to leave, it would be difficult to find someone who would have a similarly robust relationship with Elon, I think.
Let me turn to, I was going to say the lighter side, but it might be the crazier side of SpaceX for a moment, with just some anecdotes. I wonder, were you the first reporter to write about the incident that took place where SpaceX engineers actually considered shooting a rocket with a rifle to solve a problem?
Yes, I'm quite sure that I'm the first person to report that they briefly considered shooting a projectile at a upper stage in Vandenberg. This was back in 2013 when they were trying to launch the first Falcon 9. It was actually version 1.1 from Vandenberg, and they had a valve freeze that was supposed to offload liquid oxygen during a static fire test, and so they had to wait around 4 days for it to basically unfreeze and drain, and that was a painful 4-day wait because they were really, as I say, hurrying, as they always were at SpaceX.
I am watching the chat when I can, folks. It's a one-man band, and I will be getting to some of you who have questions. I'll just mention Tim Armstrong, or Tim didn't know that you were a meteorologist. Greetings from NWS Wilmington, North Carolina National Weather Service, where he's a meteorologist too. So you're among colleagues, I guess, Eric, in more ways than one.
I have a tremendous amount of respect for the National Weather Service. Here in Houston, work very closely. Actually, I live in League City, and the National Weather Service office is about 3 miles from my house, and so I talk to those guys and run by their facility all the time, and certainly have great empathy for what North Carolina went through this summer with Hurricane Helene.
Yeah. And if you weren't with us at the top of the program, do check out the other stuff that Eric somehow finds time to do. His website that he works on with a lot of colleagues, Space City Weather, and then the new one, the Eye Wall, all about keeping an eye on crazy stuff that happens down there in the Caribbean and the Atlantic, which obviously can do a lot of damage. Back to crazy stuff. I wonder if I got to think that SpaceX has the record for the craziest main payloads to go into orbit. I mean, including a cheesy gag, if you'll pardon the expression. I hope everybody remembers that. We all loved it at the Planetary Society.
Yeah, they have a knack for putting things into space that create a buzz in the space community. And one of the first ones was, you say, a wheel of Gruyere cheese on the first Dragon flight in December of 2010, which was inspired by Monty Python. And
The
then, of
cheese
course,
shop skit. Yeah, right.
the cheese shop sketch. And then, of course, the Tesla Roadster
Yeah.
that they launched with the first Falcon Heavy in 2018. And it was fun to talk to the structures guy who had to make the Roadster safe for a vacuum, because you generally don't put cars in outer space. I think that was the first automobile, if you don't count the lunar rovers, to ever go into space. And then, of course, most recently with Starship, for some reason they launched a banana.
Yeah.
So,
Did you see those shots from inside the payload bay of the banana suspended? But what really impressed me was not just the banana. It was this huge space with a banana as the only payload.
I don't think people really appreciate how much of a step change it is, that not just the payload capacity, but the volume of the fairing is just really going to change humanity's relationship with space, because we're just going to be able to put so much more and larger things up there, and it will enable us to do and try more interesting things.
I had somebody tell me that if the Super Heavy Starship had been available, they could have designed a James Webb Space Telescope that didn't have to fold the mirrors. They could have just stuck the whole thing in there. So
if you think about all the years of design and testing and construction that went into folding up the Webb telescope to fit in the Ariane 5 fairing, it is remarkable. And I think finally, now that Starship is flying, we'll start to see science payloads and things for NASA designed to fit inside of that kind of a size vehicle, and it really will be a big change.
Can't wait. That's going to be incredibly exciting. So many great accomplishments, really history-making accomplishments. The book gave me even greater respect for what SpaceX accomplished and how difficult it was learning how to get a rocket to, the book's called REENTRY, how to get a rocket to re-enter the Earth's atmosphere, and then softly come down onto a pad under power. You really did an outstanding job of demonstrating the challenges there, because, it looks so easy in all those 50s science fiction movies.
A lot of the things they do look easy, until you peel back kind of the layers of the onion and find out, actually talk to the people who had to do it, right? Yeah. The first people to make densified liquid oxygen in Florida, like no one had ever made mass quantities of super chilled liquid oxygen like that before, and they needed like hundreds of thousands of gallons of the stuff. It was quite remarkable. And it wasn't just like the rocket. Like, to make it reusable, they had to change all the ground systems, and they had to get all of the commodities changed up, and they had to work with the range to get autonomous flight termination and all these other things to sort of support a higher cadence. Before SpaceX came along, the range in Florida was set up to launch 10 or 20 rockets a year, and that was good enough.
Yeah. You wrote that you were at home when that first Falcon 9 first stage came down on the pad. Did it hit you immediately? Did you realize immediately that this changes a lot?
Yeah, absolutely. It felt like a huge moment. Matt, I'm 51, and I was born after the last Apollo landing, and always had regret that I had missed that era. And seeing what SpaceX has done beginning in 2015 and then 2016 with the boat landing, which was another profound moment for me, really realized that we were entering a new era of spaceflight that was very, very exciting. And I had less regret about what I had missed in the past and more hope about what I was looking ahead to in the future. So yeah, that was absolutely an incredible moment. As you might imagine, it was even better for them, right? They'd been
Yeah.
working for 6 months. That December 21st Orbcomm 2 launch was, I think, people look at the Falcon Heavy launch or the Starship launches or even Demo 2 and sort of say those are spectacular. But for me, it's that mission, because
Hmm.
there was so much riding on that. That was, I think people may forget, that was the return to flight mission after they blew up the rocket on the CRS-7 launch 6 months earlier. It was 4 days before Christmas. They were putting out a brand new rocket. This was the first Falcon 9 full thrust, just a huge block upgrade. First time flying with densified propellant. And oh yeah, they had to go convince the Air Force to land the rocket back at the near the launch site. And all of that was riding on this single launch, and they pulled it off, and it was just amazing.
You can't help but share in their joy and excitement when SpaceX does the video coverage of these missions, as they're continuing to do with Starship. And they cut to those shots of thousands of people on the floor at SpaceX Hawthorne, and they were just jumping up and down for joy and hugging each other. It's a wonderful thing to see. And I guess it makes those 60 and 70-hour weeks easier to take and sustain.
I hope so, for their sakes.
As we speak, I'm going to get into the competition a little bit here. The future of United Launch Alliance, ULA, is kind of up in the air, if you'll pardon the expression, that partnership between Boeing and Lockheed Martin. Are we going to see a Vulcan launch this year? I mean, that was the target, right? They really wanted to try and get that done.
No, they're not going to get their first national security launch this year. That's going to move into January.
Okay. It's an improved version. I mean, it's certainly more advanced than the old Deltas and Atlases, but it's not going to come down on its tail the way SpaceX managed to do. What's the future for ULA in particular? And then we can talk about some of the others. I mean, it's run by Tony Bruno. I've interviewed him a couple of times. I bet you've done it many more times than that. He's a great guy. I really like the guy. And I think he's done some great things there. But my God, that the gap, as you have already talked about, and you certainly wrote about, between what they're trying to do and what SpaceX has already accomplished seems to be growing.
I have a great respect for Tory Bruno. He's kind of a very difficult job, right? Not only does he have to compete against SpaceX, but he kind of has to do it with two hands tied behind his back, because ULA is owned by Boeing and Lockheed, and these are companies that have not invested into ULA, right? All of the development work that ULA has done, they've had to go to the government and sort of beg for funding to do, and the government largely paid for the development of Vulcan. And it's a great rocket. They've launched it twice now. It seems to work really well. And as you would expect, given ULA's sterling launch record, but it's not going to be reusable, so they'll never be able to compete really on price with SpaceX. I suspect Blue Origin, which builds the engines for ULA, for Vulcan, is going to continue to sort of slowly raise the price of those engines, and that will sort of further constrain ULA. They don't build any of their engines. They don't build the upper stage engines. They don't build the fairings. So they're kind of beholden to their suppliers. It's kind of the opposite of being vertically integrated, and that's another challenge. They have lots of launch contracts with Project Kuiper, but as I first reported nearly 2 years ago, the company has been up for sale. The parents have indicated they would like to sell ULA. And the most serious buyer was Jeff Bezos, Blue Origin. He looked at it. I think he turned it down about a year ago, essentially deciding that the price that the parents were asking for was too high. More recently, Sierra Space looked at buying it. Again, they walked away, presumably because the price was too high. I think the parents believe it's worth more than it is, and I think especially with New Glenn hopefully making its debut within the next month or two,
Mm.
that's really going to put a lot of pressure on Vulcan, especially if they start landing New Glenn stages and reflying them. That just, ULA Tory talks about they have a path toward reuse. They're going to, have this high altitude inflatable shield, basically it's called HIAD, that will come out and like protect the engines, and they'll be recovered from the ocean, and refurbished and reflown. I have a really hard time seeing that actually happening. I feel like that's more talk than reality, because again, I don't know where the investment in that is really going to come from. So it's a difficult future, because 10 years ago they were the only game really in town, and now SpaceX has come along and then Blue Origin, and so they're like kind of the one of three, and they don't have an owner in Jeff Bezos who's willing to put $1 billion or $2 billion every year into the company, and they don't have the Falcon 9 that SpaceX is going to launch 130 times this year. So it's a tough road for them to hoe. And then you've got other competitors like Rocket Lab coming up with a Neutron vehicle, Stoke Space, and potentially Firefly, with their partnership with Northrop Grumman on a medium lift launch vehicle. So lots of challenges ahead for them. I would say that it's the future is difficult.
So how about Blue Origin? I mean, we all thought maybe this will be another SpaceX driven by another billionaire who totally believes in the human potential in space. That New Glenn looks like a pretty nice rocket, but we haven't seen one fly yet.
If you go back to 2015, about a month before SpaceX landed its rocket, Blue Origin landed New Shepard for the first time, vertically upright. Super exciting, super cool.
Yeah.
And then SpaceX landed a month later, and you thought, man, we're going to have this amazing competition over the next decade between SpaceX and Blue Origin. And, the next decade, SpaceX has flown like 350 or 70 rockets to orbit, and Blue Origin has flown none. So we didn't get a competition. I keep hoping for them to take off, and I do think the narrative around them changes once New Glenn gets flying. And that they've got a lot of interesting stuff they're working on, but they're not moving at a pace right now they're not moving at the rate that SpaceX is. So even though they're making progress, they're still falling further behind. SpaceX is still kind of accelerating forward. So I think they have a good chance to be sort of the second best company, most innovative space company in the United States. But something really bad would happen to SpaceX for Blue Origin to catch up.
It just occurred to me, you were talking about Blue Origin selling its engines, the BE-4, to ULA to power the Vulcan. And that poor ULA has gone from having to buy Russian engines that the Russians kept raising the price for, and now maybe Jeff Bezos is going to do that. I wonder if they'll be able to get them, during prime days and get them cheaper.
They were in a tough spot because they could have gone to Aerojet to buy engines for they could have bought the AR1 engine for Vulcan, but Aerojet does not sell things cheap. So if you're trying to build a rocket competitive on price with the Falcon 9, the Aerojet's, I mean, they did the right thing, I think, by going with Blue Origin. If they weren't going to develop their own engine, it's just it's still not a good answer to the problem of SpaceX, which is now building hundreds of Raptor rocket engines a year. I mean, how do you compete with that scale? When you have to go out and buy every engine, it's very tough.
Do you think that go ahead.
I was just going to say, I said that goes back to sort of the parents being unwilling to kind of invest in any kind of innovation at ULA.
Do you think that Elon still feels the same drive, the same dedication toward his dream of, building a city on Mars, which is a description I use carefully? I'll come back to that. But do you think that still drives him as much as it did at the beginning of SpaceX?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I really think I do. And having talking to him a fair amount over the years, I mean, he has always been consistent about that, and always very passionate about it. And so, yeah, I mean, he's involved in a lot of different things, and clearly, has been swept up in politics in recent months. But I think he's still very committed to getting to Mars as fast as possible. And certainly the urgency within SpaceX has not let off a single bit.
So it looks like they're well on the way to having the rockets to get us there. But I know you mentioned a Fraser Cain, one of the most enjoyable and yet in some ways depressing books that I've read recently, A City on Mars by the Weinersmiths, Zach and Kelly Weinersmith, who I also, we featured that book here in the book club. And the challenges that they cataloged if we're going to become a spacefaring species. I have talked to people who know a lot about this stuff, like life support, people who build life support systems, that said, hey, is SpaceX paying enough attention to how they're going to keep people alive on Mars as well as getting them there and back? And they say no. Can you counter that? Can you tell me otherwise?
No, I mean, they don't have like a large division of the company devoted to that. And that's by design. I mean, the nearest problem to solve is the transportation system, because if you can't get humans safely to Mars, then what's the point of having like a Mars habitation plan, right? It's all just theoretical. You're just spinning your wheels. And look, I mean, I love NASA, but they've been doing Mars habitation studies, Mars design reference missions for decades and decades and decades.
Made a lot of great posters.
Yeah, but like, it's all just talk because we can't actually get there. So I think the plan in the big picture is to actually build something that could get you there, and then work with NASA on figuring out, okay, you've done all this work with ECLSS on the International Space Station. You've done, all these studies. Let's come up with a plan for a series of missions that sort of allows people to eventually live on Mars. And NASA has lots of expertise in that, and I think SpaceX wants to leverage that. But again, there are so many steps to go between now and then that I think they're fighting those battles now, and knowing that they'll have the engineering know-how to solve those problems down the line. So I find that criticism pretty disingenuous. Like, well, SpaceX doesn't have Mars departments. They're not really serious about it, or they're not, or they just want the people to go to Mars and die. No, they're just working on the hardest problem right in front of them. And when they sort of get that down, then they'll turn their focus to the next thing. I mean, it's not like when SpaceX was doing reuse with the Falcon 9, they had this huge Starship project working, right? They were sort of like, well, we got to figure out vertical landing and whether we can reuse rockets first, and then we'll move to the next step, and then we'll move to the next step, and that's kind of how they work. And so they will have people they're thinking about, like Paul Wooster, engineer, great guy, been at SpaceX for a long time, is kind of their chief Mars designer. So he's thinking about these problems, but like, they're not actively researching and solving them all, before they have the rocket.
One of my favorite passages in the book was a conversation that you had with Elon, and it was about building hundreds of starships and doing them for $5 million a piece. I won't fully quote you, but it was something like, that's effing nuts. And he agreed with you.
I mean, when you look at this, you look at the Starship rocket as it exists today, right? 36 engines, 35 engines, the first stage, and 6 in the upper stage, and this towering rocket that's larger than the Saturn V rocket. And they've built 12 of them this year. And NASA, in 15 years of the Space Launch System rocket program, has built 2. So they're not building them. They're not building the upper stage starships for $5 million yet, but I'll bet they're building them for $25 million. So Yeah, it is insane, but they're trying to do something at a completely different scale than aerospace really has seen before. And so it's one of those things where I don't think they'll get all the way there, but they're going to get pretty close.
I think back to your mention at the top of this conversation of Henry Ford
Mm,
and what his innovations did for the automobile industry.
yeah. And Henry
Fascinating.
did said a lot of objectionable things too, right? I mean, like these
And how?
people are not angels.
Yeah, yeah. Um, we just learned that President-elect Donald Trump is going to nominate Jared Isaacman to be the NASA administrator. Uh, Entrepreneur, two-time spaceman, obviously pretty close to SpaceX, if not Elon. Uh, have you started to think about what this might mean for NASA and space exploration, space development in general?
Yes, I wrote a 2,000-word article. It's on Ars Technica, published today.
We
I
have a
think
new one at planetary.org too from
yes, yes, I
Casey
received an
Breyer.
email about that today.
Yeah.
Jared, I've talked to Jared a lot over the last 5 years.
Hmm.
I have a tremendous amount of respect for him. And what I really like about him is that he's a very genuine and a decent human being.
Hmm.
He thinks a lot about the health and well-being of his crew and their families throughout the process of training for missions and flying the missions. It's very clear to me he's not a billionaire seeking to take joyrides. He's like legitimately, like his goal in all of this. I think yes, of course. Does he want to have adventures? Absolutely. Like he's a pilot. He flies a Soviet era MiG around. You know, um, you know, pulling 6Gs. Like so, yes, absolutely. But he is also wants to push out the frontier of what is possible by private citizens in space, so commercial space. So we saw that with the EVA a couple of months ago on the Polaris Dawn mission, right? And oh, by the way, you know, he didn't take his buddies on these missions. Like in the first
Yeah.
flight, he took a cancer survivor and a science communicator and a raffle winner. In the second flight, he took two SpaceX engineers. You know, these two women were the first SpaceX engineers to ever go to orbit.
Hmm.
And so I think, you know, he wants to contribute and help push the U.S. spaceflight enterprise forward, and he sees the value of commercial space, and so he thinks he can help out, you know, by going to NASA and trying to sort of help them manage through this commercial space transition, because it's hard, right? You know, it's difficult for NASA to buy parts of NASA to buy commercial services of things that they've previously built. But it's also better in a lot of ways. And NASA probably needs to be different than it has been for the last 50 years. So I think it's an inspired choice, and I look forward to seeing what he's going to pull off. But I can tell you from personal knowledge, he is a genuine human being who is going to do this for what he thinks the right reasons are. And the right reasons in his mind are very similar to what the Planetary Society espouses about exploring and understanding space.
That's great to hear. Thank you. We heard as we speak this morning, the NASA administrator and others tell us that Artemis 2 is now, they're talking about April of 2026, going around the moon. What do you think are the chances that they'll still be in SLS by the time we hit April of 2026?
Well, I kind of went on a limb today and reported that there was a fairly decent chance that the Space Launch System rocket was going to be canceled, even before Artemis 2. It was really interesting to see them have the news conference today, you know, 6 weeks or so before a new administration comes in. I think it's pretty clear and not at all controversial to say that Isaacman and the landing team, whoever that is comprised of, that come into NASA, are going to take a very, very hard look at the Artemis plans, which have bogged down, as you know, as we've seen, like with another delay. And I think they're going to try to make it more commercial. And the fact of the matter is that, you know, the Space Launch System rocket and its ground systems cost NASA about $3 billion a year or more. And like, for a rocket that, you know, we don't have a paucity of commercial heavy lift. The Falcon Heavy rocket's flown a dozen times. Vulcan has flown twice. New Glenn is about to fly. Starship has made 6 flight tests, I think. Kind of hard to count them all up at this point. And like, you know, probably within the next year we'll make 20 more. So, I mean, it doesn't take a genius to sort of predict the demise of that. So I think they're going to take a hard look at Artemis. They're still going to stick to sort of the moon then Mars plan, but I think they're going to make significant architecture changes. So yes, we saw the administrator get up and put some new dates out today. And look, I respect Bill Nelson, Jim Free, Kathy Kerner, the people that are making those decisions. I just think it really didn't make a whole lot of sense to do that, because it's all just going to get a hard look. And I think things will look, the architecture probably will look significantly different 6 months from now.
Should be an interesting ride with all the contracts.
It's going to be a very interesting ride.
Yeah. You're going to have a few extra minutes here as we I turn now to the chat, and then we'll wrap up a little bit. And I'm reading these cold for the most part, so bear with me.
Whatever folks. You got, I'm ready for it.
Okay. Kareem says, I worked at eBay when we purchased PayPal. I wrote the code that gave Musk $180 million. Wow. Pretty kind of you, Kareem. He quit immediately since he was instantly vested and used that money to start SpaceX. Yeah, that was how SpaceX got its start, right? Which you talk about in the first book.
Yeah, he took half of the money from PayPal and put it into SpaceX to give it a go. And, you know, thought it would probably fail, but wanted to give it a shot. So
Kareem, you did your part to build the Starship. We've already talked about his other question. What are your thoughts about Jacob Isaacman? So check it out, folks, in Ars Technica. You should be reading Eric's stuff anyway. Here's one from Craig. Do you think Elon will try to convince Trump to publicly commit America to sending astronauts to Mars, similar to Kennedy's speech in 1962? Didn't that happen in Trump's first term?
Trump's first term was interesting because Trump was always, they would do these events about Artemis and the moon, and Trump would just kind of ask these questions. Well, why aren't we going to Mars? Right? I think he was always much more interested in Mars, thought it was a much grander gesture. Kind of had Obama's attitude toward the moon, which was been there, done that. But I think Elon is certainly in the president-elect's ear about going to Mars. But the problem is the whole focus of NASA right now is on the moon. And so I think that they will find a happy medium where NASA will continue working with SpaceX and Starship toward the moon. SpaceX will kind of continue full tilt on Mars plans. There will be a lighter regulatory environment so that if SpaceX is ready to send uncrewed missions to Mars in 2026, they can try that. Wow. You know, I still have a very difficult time seeing humans on Mars before the 2030s, but we'll see. We'll see what happens. You know, there's going to be lots of interesting things to happen.
Do you see China as providing an increasing incentive for us to get on that road to the red planet?
Not to the red planet, certainly for the moon.
Okay, especially the South Pole.
Especially the South Pole. There's a limited amount of real estate there. And I do think you'll see the Trump administration framing the space discussion around a need to sort of harness U.S. entrepreneurship to compete and exceed China and its spaceflight ambitions. That will be sort of the message that if we're going to be successful in the coming decades, it will be because of entrepreneurs like Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and these other commercial space companies that are sort of building upon what NASA has done before, and NASA needs to kind of continue to seed those efforts.
Here's one from my wonderful colleague, Mark. Really enjoyed the book and the stories of those who built the rockets and the tech. Captivating writing. When I finished it, I immediately bought and read Liftoff. Good on you, Mark. Hoping a future volume will make this a trilogy, which was going to be my last question. Is there a third book in store?
Well, not right away. I'd really like to see where the Starship program is going. I don't think we have a good idea yet of how fully they're going to nail the heat shield issue. It's going to be difficult to get to rapid reuse of Starship, I think. Still very much to be determined how they get through orbital refueling. You'd want to see where they get to with the Artemis program, and then to see whether they're likely to succeed with a Mars settlement or not. And then I think at that point, it'll be really time to tell the definitive story of Starship. So I would love to write one of those books, but it probably will be, at least 6 to 8 years from now before that came out. So don't look for it right away.
Okay.
There's something else I'm working on in the interim, but I don't really want to talk about it yet. So sorry.
Oh, are you sure?
I'm
all
sure,
right.
yes.
I'd love to get that out of you, of course. In the meantime, while we've been talking, Kareem, who we said he has a piece of Starship, added he owes me $1 billion, Elon. So good luck collecting that.
$2 billion to spare.
Yeah. And here is a great question also from Kareem. No more JWST because not commercially interesting enough to the billionaires? You gave me a little bit of hope regarding Jared Isaacman that, his goals are the right ones, the ones the society, Planetary Society, would support. I mean, what do you think of what an Isaacman-led NASA would mean for pure science missions like Mars sample return and so many others?
So I think Mars sample return, you kind of have to put it in a different box, because if it is going to become the policy of the United States to send humans to Mars by 2030, 2032, then what's the point of Mars sample return?
Robotic return, yeah,
robotic return,
right.
Because you're talking about bringing back a few dozen test tubes full of Martian rocks and soil, but as no earlier than 2032. So my guess on that is that gets shelved, but could be wrong. Interestingly, NASA had originally planned to talk about its new design choice at the AGU meeting this week, and then they didn't. So, but that's the side. I do think this planetary science program will continue to thrive, or to continue to be successful. It's a relatively small part of NASA's budget. It has bipartisan support. The Europa Clipper mission that everyone loves was championed solely by a Republican congressman from Texas named John Culberson. So,
and us at the Planetary Society.
Yes. But he was the one who was writing the checks.
Yeah,
so
that's right.
I kind of
no question.
Kind of give more credit. So I think, and like, no companies are going to do the James Webb stuff. That's the kind of stuff NASA should be doing. Like the Webb telescope, the Europa Clipper, the Dragonfly mission, to Titan, which is so exciting, and now is going to launch in a few years. I mean, that's what we ought to be doing, right? That's what NASA ought to be doing, in my opinion. So yes, I continue to see. I mean, the billionaires are fascinated by those missions too.
Let me bring it back to SpaceX and Elon as we start to wrap this up, because we got a question from Arnold, which goes in exactly the direction I was hoping. Perhaps the most insightful discussion Eric Berger put forth is in the epilogue. An example is the path taken by Howard Hughes, who flew the Spruce Goose just once, became a recluse later in life. What failure, if any, would turn Musk's leadership and SpaceX to a similar path, if you can imagine that? But I also want to say, here's quoting from the book, you in that epilogue, I'm worried about Elon. There's exactly one person who can stop the steamroller, and that is the same person who set it into motion and still has his foot pressed down to the floor, pedal to the metal.
I mean, he's got a lot on his plate, right?
More and more.
He's running SpaceX, running Tesla, running Neuralink, running the Boring Company,
Doge,
looking into the U.S. government, trying to keep President-elect Donald Trump happy, running, competing AI networks, running X, involved in many lawsuits. I mean, like, at some point it may all become too much, right? And I think, there's clearly some things with Elon, being on the spectrum that are an issue. And so I do worry about Elon's mental health, and would love to see him remain engaged, because by and large, he has been, for the technological level and achievement of the United States. You look at satellite internet, you look at launch capability, you look at electric cars. I mean, his companies have just pushed forward the boundaries so far, and so I would love to see him continue to being that person who can look around the corner and then push his entities to build toward that future. And if SpaceX lost him, it would lose kind of the innovating force kind of behind their success and their push.
God forbid, if it all ended tomorrow, we would still look at this, and I think history would always look at this as a towering achievement in terms of advancing space technology. I suspect you would agree. And I wonder if, maybe to close this out, would you read the very last line in the book? It's that starts with, "The barriers are falling away."
Yes, here, let me just find that. Then the epilogue,
Sure.
I believe.
While he does that, while Eric searches his book, I will tell you, if you're not already aware of it, there's our selection for December, Project Solar Sail, the 21st Century Edition, put together by one of our good friends at the Planetary Society, David Brin and Stephen W. Potts, and they also credit one of the editors of the first edition of the book, Arthur C. Clarke, Sir Arthur, to the rest of us. It is an amazing collection of fact and fiction about solar sailing. I highly recommend it. It's great fun, and we will be talking to David Brin and Stephen Potts in not quite the first week of January, but the week of January 6th, right here in the community. Did you find that bit, Eric?
I did. Where did you want me to start again?
Oh, just it's basically the last couple of lines. The barriers are falling away.
All right. What once seemed impossible no longer does. Humans belong among the stars. The barriers are falling away. The future is unknowable but tantalizing. I don't want this ride to end. It's just starting to get good.
Hear, hear. See, I could have read that, but it's so much better to hear it from the guy who came up with the words. Eric, thank you again for joining us, but mostly for this wonderful, wonderful book, Reentry, which is available. If you haven't read it yet, and you're a space geek, you got to get it. Ben Bella, right, is the publisher, and it is a wonderful read and a wonderful chronicle of perhaps the most amazing story that has happened in space exploration, certainly since the Apollo program. And its chronicler has been our guest over the last nearly hour and a quarter. Eric Berger of Ars Technica and elsewhere. Clear skies and smooth sailing. Keep up the great work.
Well, you're very kind and generous, Matt. Thank you very much for the great questions and discussion this evening.
You're very welcome. Our pleasure. Folks, I will see all of you again soon. Have a wonderful holiday. Keep visiting here in the community. Thank you for making all of this, everything that we do possible, you members. And if you are not a member, planetary.org/join to really become part of the fun. Take care, everyone, and have a wonderful evening. Bye-bye.